This is the Course of Action podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, and your favorite platform worldwide. You can also stream new episodes on the Reeves Across America radio network every Monday at noon Eastern. Reeves Across America's mission is to remember the fallen, honor those who serve, and teach future generations the value of freedom. We're back here with TR Hendricks, who's been here before when he released his first book, The Instructor, but now he's back because this spring we got another Derek Harrington novel coming up, The Infiltrator, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And of course, he's here rocking his 49ers gear because today is the conference championship game. So TR, how are you doing, man?
I am doing well. I am pumped up. I'm pumped up because I'm back here with you for another awesome episode. I'm pumped up because my Niners are going a little later on, and no matter who wins the AFC game, we're going to get sweet revenge on them because we lost to both those teams in the Super Bowl before. So
Okay.
it's a good day. It's a good day.
Now, you've had a very busy year since The Instructor came out. You got
Yeah.
the ITW debut author program that I saw you had at Thriller Fest.
Yep.
Gotten great reviews for The Instructor. It's a fantastic book.
Thank you.
The paperback just came out recently, didn't it?
5 days ago. Yeah.
Yeah, a
This
couple
past
days
Tuesday.
ago.
Yeah.
And now, of course, you have The Infiltrator, the second book, and it kind of lends into a little bit more about what the future of Derek Harrington really looks like, because in the first one, you really didn't catch that until the end.
Yeah.
And it was very unique in the way it kind of dropped that, and you go, oh, okay. Now
Yeah.
you got to see, oh, okay, this is the future of it. This is what it's going to be. So since then, since The Instructor came out, what has life kind of been like as a debut author in kind of handling the success you've had?
It's been a whirlwind for sure. The only time I can think of a busier day than the debut program at Thriller Fest was like my wedding day, 17 something years ago. It was just like that constant like, oh hey, we need you over there, hey, we need you over this, but it was great. It was wonderful, and I got to meet so many people, and it was a great program. I love that ITW does that. And it's been really interesting because, there's the propensity that you want to keep your momentum going for as long as possible,
Right.
which is no easy feat because every week there's somebody else is coming out, and that's understandable. That's the nature of the business, but you want to, keep your name kind of blossoming out there and growing and whatnot. So continuing to do podcasts, continuing to engage, do in-person events if you can, guest blogs, all that stuff. But at the same time, at least in my case, I was signed to a 2-book deal. So I was working the sequel so I'm doing like all the release publicity for The Instructor. I'm doing all the edits for The Infiltrator. I'm kind of fielding both lanes, if you will,
Right.
all while managing the day-to-day of my regular life of 9 to 5 job and kids and softball tournaments and gymnastics meets and all that other good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been interesting. I will say that now that I've kind of gotten the pressure of the initial release off, like I was like the complete doubting Thomas when it came to the release of my first book. I was like, people are like, well, no, like it's out, it's coming out, like it's sitting in the stores right now. They're going to start selling it tomorrow morning. And I was like, aliens could come tonight and just wipe out the earth. Like, I mean, I won't believe it until I'm in the store
Yeah.
holding my book on my debut. So now that like that pressure's off, and I've gotten into not only my own internal synchronization with how I write and how to maximize the time that I write, um, because it's not as plentiful as it used to be with all the other commitments and engagements. So you really have to make the most out of that time when it does become available. So I've learned to do that really well, but I've also had a good year to grind through the traditional publishing mechanism and learn how that works and get into that rhythm. So I think that's the big difference this time around is just kind of the training wheels are off a little bit, you know. I know what to expect coming into this cycle. I know what to improve on, right? You know, good old veterans with the after action
Yeah,
reviews. You know,
yeah,
like,
we love
oh,
our
okay,
AARs.
yeah, we get us some AAR in here, you know. So I was like, all right, this did go so well, that didn't go so well. It could strengthen something over here, maybe do less of that over there. I mean, you see my social. I act like an idiot all the time, you know. So
But
maybe
it's
maybe
comical,
that's a little
man.
off-putting to people, but like I just like to keep things light because there's enough serious shit out there in the
Hmm.
world, you know. And the stuff that I write about is kind of doomsday type serious. So you
Yeah,
know, let's give people a little breather and just make them laugh at me instead, you know.
yeah.
So, but all in all, it's been a phenomenal experience, and I'm really excited. I'm starting to see some preliminary reviews come back on the Infiltrator, which has got me um, not only excited but more relieved than anything else because there was a whole lot coming into the sequel where I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, and then getting like positive returns on it, um, especially with how that whole process unraveled, which I'll you know I can go into depth about a little later on, but yeah, seeing that it actually came out okay, that's a big sigh of relief, you know.
Well, good. So
Yeah, yeah.
what is something that you've learned kind of in this first year that
Hmm.
you would advise to potential authors that are looking to debut? What would it be a piece of advice you would tell them to do something to do right post publishing?
Okay. Hmm. I would say um, time management. Honestly, um, earmark that time for your publicity side of things, right? Because it's just the nature of the beast. Whether I think you're self-published or traditional published, but you know, I'm speaking more on the traditional side. Like a debut author, you're going to get a little bit of attention. You're going to get a little bit of stuff dedicated, thrown your way because the publisher wants to see that you're successful. But just the nature of the beast is that the big names get the big budgets, you know, and they get the attention. So if you really want to spread the word and increase your platform and everything, a lot of it's going to fall on your own shoulders, you know. And so earmarking that time so that you have it and you understand how it balances in with, okay, I need to be creating new content, but I need new content in terms of your writing. You know, I need to be revising that, you know, further down the line. Then I need to be creating new content for my postings and my publicity and all that other stuff. So realizing that it's a big slice of the pie and that you're going to have to work on it. Um, it's not for everybody per se, but again, in my experience, you know, like, wow, that was the eye opener. It's like, wow, the publisher dedicated what they could, but now it's really on me to carry this momentum forward as best as possible. So making connections with people such as yourself that have platforms that have, you know, podcasts, but you know, being gracious, reaching out, you know, just, you know, shooting your shot, say, hey, I know I'm just a debut author, but you know, would you have me on? And sometimes people are like, oh, I can't get you in for 6 months. Sometimes people are like, yeah, I'll get you in tomorrow, you know. So just researching, making those connections, figuring out your time management, and really allocating that for the publicity side of things will vastly help yourself when it comes to the post publishing, you know, the day after your book is out in the wild. Now it's like, okay, great, it's out there, now I got to keep it going, you know. And that was the biggest thing I think for me.
I think it's really important to keep your name out there because they say that first 30 to 60 days after you publish a book is the most important. And
Hmm.
then after that, there's somebody else that's coming out. Like you said, there's other people coming
Yep.
out. So then you're up to a challenge of keeping the buzz going because authors like yourself are releasing every year. Well, that's a long time. And there's a lot of other
Right.
things that they could look at and books they can read, audiobooks and such. So then you got to pull them back towards you when it's getting close
Hmm.
to, release time the next year. So if you keep that
Right.
buzz kind of going, then you already have a certain amount of them hooked still. So when you go
Yeah.
to ramp up the PR machine for the second book the next year or whatever it is, you have a little bit of an advantage because you've been keeping it going. And that's where social media comes into play. But it's so hard
Mhm.
nowadays with the algorithms and the way things change and people's attention
It
spans.
it really is, and to touch on that is, different authors find different strengths with what they do in terms of their thing. Like a lot of authors do newsletters,
Yeah.
and build that up, and that's great. I just found that myself, like out of all the ways to reach readers, I found that my social media channels are the best way to do it because it's more of a direct line to not only my writing, but I like to mix in other things. So it's not just me beating you over the head 9 times out of 10 saying, hey, Derek Harrington's still here. It's, I like to repost like guys that are setting spring traps or, survival tips of how to make candles out of cordage and stuff. Like, I think that stuff is fascinating, and I think other people can, if you like establish that kind of a mix, it's like, oh, this guy talks about his writing, but he also does AI graphics for his characters, and he posts survival stuff, and there's some military stuff thrown in there, and oh, by the way, he just made a Ghostbusters reference, and like, if you cultivate kind of a personality that keeps people engaged, where they're not just like, oh, I'll talk to him again in a year when his next book comes out because he's boring as a piece of burnt toast in between. That holds a lot, and I've found that that's been my kind of niche in this whole deal. I tried blogging. No. I tried. I tried the newsletter. I couldn't get Mailchimp to work. Like, I was just like, I'm done with this stuff. So to each their own. And hats off to the guys that and gals that can do it with those other mediums. I just found that the socials is the thing that helps me keep that momentum going the best.
So let's go back to the instructor. Derek
Yeah.
Carrington is in kind of a predicament, financial predicament that I'm not trying to be spoiler free, so people will go, if you haven't gotten it, then go pick it up. Um, but he's in a bit of a financial predicament where he's kind of leveraged into doing something that he kind of doesn't want to do, feels a little itchy and sketchy about.
Yep. Yep.
Eventually, though, he gets into it, no issues, and then things kind of start to unravel. But then you really start to see the leverage going his way, and he goes into a lot of survival.
Hmm.
Let's talk about some of the research you did on that, so that we'll go into the research for the infiltrator here in a little bit. But what kind of
Sure.
research did you do for the survival side of the instructor?
So that was a great mix of online resources, um, volumes of texts and whatnot. Survival guides and from different venues, whether it was the American military or just I think I have a SAS survival guide as well. These old field manuals from like the 1970s that were pretty fun to read through, but also just on like the civilian side of things, where it's not okay survival because you got shot down behind enemy lines. It's survival because you fell off a hill and broke your leg, and now you have to wait and make it through the next 4 days until search and rescue can find you, right? So there was a lot of books like that, and that was a good healthy mix because Derek is trained by his father as like an outdoorsman, not necessarily a survivalist, but an outdoorsman. And there's some bleed over there. You know how to fish, you know how to hunt and whatnot. Um, and then he learns survival from the Marine Corps, and then he kind of takes it further. And so when he comes out and he's opening his own school, he's got the military background of survival training mixed with his upbringing as an outdoorsman, and the skills that his father imparted on him. But he's fully cognizant that he's teaching a civilian market, right? He's not being contracted to teach Air Force pilots. He's out there teaching hikers and um, corporate retreats that are doing team building and
Yeah.
whatnot. So that
The
kind of
everyday
research
Joe.
aspect, yeah, the everyday Joe. So that kind of research aspect really came in handy from reading those different kind of sources. Like, okay, this one's geared towards a pocket guide that can go in somebody's back pocket, and this one's geared towards evading the Viet Cong in 1968. So there's a diverse background there. The biggest source was honestly my friend Rob, who is provided like the blueprint kind of foundation for Derek as a character from a I don't want to say like statistical. Trying to think of a better from like a technical standpoint, I guess you kind of say, kind of mirroring the training that he went through in the military and the knowledge that he has as a wilderness survival expert. And he was a great resource because I could pick up the phone and be like, "Hey Rob, I'm thinking about doing this." He's like, "No, no, 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 that would never work. Like you need to do this." Or, "Hey, if you're going to be having them over here, you could use this kind of plant and it can be stripped and then braided and turned into a pretty, taut cord." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So little bits of those snippets where it's like, "Oh, that's a tulip poplar." The leaf is identifiable because it looks like the head of a cat. Like that wasn't me. Those are little like anecdotal things that I got through that primary source interviewing with Rob, and he was gracious enough to impart that knowledge on me a couple times so that I could weave it into the story. So really, sky's the limit when it comes to research. Is you want to have good sources, make sure that they know what they're talking about, because you would hate to include something in your writing that ends up being just some guy's imagination, and all of a sudden you're quoting it as gospel, and the survival community is like, where did he get
Oh yeah.
this is the most ridiculous. That'll kill you in a heartbeat. So
Yeah.
but I'll go to the library, I'll go online, I'll go wherever it'll take me in order to get the proper information. I'll even go to the DoD. I've gotten um approvals from them. I did for the sequel, for the original draft of the sequel. I was working with the Air Force Public Affairs Office, and for number three, it's not really a spoiler, but I did the same thing with the Coast Guard Public Affairs Office as well. So little hint there, dropping.
So you mentioned that you've been working with them. So you reached out to them and asked them some questions, or asked them for some resources, and they kind of replied back and were willing to do that, or how did that go down?
Yeah, I reached out. I think first you reach out to, well, the actual way you're supposed to do it is to reach out to the National Public Affairs Office, the Air Force Public Affairs Office for the entire country. And then they evaluate your request and push it down to the regional public affairs office that would handle wherever you are or wherever your request happened to be. It's like, I'm an author in New York, but if the scene I want to write about is in Colorado Springs near the academy, they would hand it off, I think, to Colorado to handle. Um, what I did is I just started writing units, which was not the way to go about it. And I'm like, "Hey, I'm this guy. Let me on base. Let me look at your jets." And they're like, "No, that's not how it works." And so they referred me back to the national guys, who then pushed it down to New York. And then you have to go through kind of a vetting process, even on top of that. Like, national will first honor your initial request to just make sure you're, I guess, like, not a crazy person, which is subjective when it comes to me. But then, like, they, I think once they give it the initial once over, they leave it up to the regional guys and gals to do the actual due diligence, right? So you almost have to do a more in-depth pitch to them. And I found I actually ran into a little bit of difficulty when I did that, because I pitched my proposed storyline and how it intersected with Air Force public affairs and why I needed their technical expertise so that I could get the everything accurate and authentic. And the Air Force officer who responded on the other end, I was working with a civilian in the office, but the Air Force officer that they tapped to provide that expertise was basically like angry because he's like, well, that would never happen in that kind of a unit. That what you're saying is preposterous, and that wouldn't happen. And it wasn't something outlandish like, we were firing space alien chameleons out of a missile. It was just how it had to do with like unit corruption and bad actors, people not doing the best things in the best interest.
Right.
And the answer that came back was kind of like, well, no, it was just like a drinking the Kool-Aid kind of answer.
Mm.
Of like, no, I can't answer those questions because that would never happen. I was like, never seems like a strong
Yeah.
term, and especially when, and the other thing was like, I know that I'm speaking to a colonel, and I respect that and I honor that and everything, but like, I, I'm not in elementary school. Like I did my time around the block as well. I've had plenty of run-ins with bad actors
Yeah.
in my military career.
Same.
So to blanket say,
Yeah.
well, that would never happen, so I'm not going to answer your questions, I thought was a very naive response.
It is.
Luckily, yeah, of course, and luckily the civilian in that office kind of recognized that and recognized the two rams lining up to slam horns together, and she massaged it, and he ended up doing just like a massive info dump of stuff. I don't think it was actually really related to what I wanted, but he gave me like an hour's worth of material, and they can say that they honored my request, and I can say that I got information from the Air Force. We'll see what comes of it. Suffice it to say, that whole story arc of that involved that research, that got removed from the sequel and held for a later date in a possible spin-off. So I'm not too broken up about it right now because it didn't drastically affect things because we ended up cutting that story arc anyway. But yeah, those are the kinds of ups and downs that you get, I guess, when you're dealing with the Department of Defense and public affairs
Yeah.
people. It can be interesting who you get on one side.
I'm sure. So
Yeah,
let's talk about a little bit about your military experience. You were
sure.
a military intelligence advisor, one point in time assigned to the Green Zone, working
Yep.
with the Iraq ministry. Let's talk about kind of that a little bit. What was it like serving in that role in that capacity over there, and how has it kind of helped you form some of the basis to the books?
It was a very interesting time for a lot of different reasons, and with that particular assignment. So I was in the army. They have this thing called branch detail, which I'll try to be as succinct as possible, which really isn't my thing. I'm usually pretty long-winded, but um, branch detail is basically like, if you get commissioned as a military intelligence officer, which I was as a second lieutenant. I was commissioned into intelligence, but then the intelligence branch decides to loan you out to another branch, until they need you, essentially, until you make captain. So you do your lieutenant time in another branch, which is how I got the best of both worlds, in my opinion. I got to be an MI officer, but I spent all my lieutenant time as a tank commander, and tank platoon leader. So, and there's more to why that happens, but that's for another podcast. So when I had gotten to that second deployment, I had spent the last 2.5 years as a tank officer, and my first deployment was as a tank officer, and it was a combat forward deployment where I was out patrolling the streets of Baghdad every day, in armored Humvees and whatnot. And I came home. I went to intelligence school because now I had switched over. I was getting promoted to captain. I went to intelligence school, and I was still in intelligence school when I got orders to redeploy, because on the grand strategy, this was 2007. At that point, the thing that that the policy was hammering home was transition, 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 transition. The Iraqis need to step up and take control of their government and their country and their defense. So the U.S. military is going to fade into the background. And this was in 2007. So the military came up with this concept called transition teams. Uh, Basically, the idea was, let's take the special forces model of, 6 highly trained individuals or 12 highly trained individuals, and create a team and drop them in these locations with a specific focus to whatever end. And they did that, but they did that with just conventional forces. So they took the special forces model, used just line troops like myself to pull it off, and the mission of those teams was to go into any particular military unit or government agency or whatever, and transition it from being a US led operation to an Iraqi led operation. And so here I am. I'm in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, which is home of the military intelligence training for the Army. I get orders to redeploy before I've even graduated. Go to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I'm like, oh, this stinks. I'm like freezing to death out there. Then uh, I find out that I'm going to be on a military intelligence specific transition team. I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool.
Interesting.
Then they go, yeah, and then they go, not only is it going to be an intelligence specific um, assignment, it's also going to be a joint assignment, which for any of your viewers, if they don't know, that means you're working with other branches of the military. So I had Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps personnel on my intelligence team as well. And then we were assigned to the overarching agency of the Iraqi Ministry of Interior. But within the Ministry of Interior was something called the National Information and Intelligence Agency, which was essentially supposed to be the Iraqi version of the FBI. And we actually had a very, very small contingent of FBI agents in the Green Zone in the U.S. Embassy. They were only allowed to work in the embassy. They couldn't go out into sector. There was big. If you ever watched the movie The Kingdom with Jamie
Yeah.
Foxx, you'll know what
Big
I'm
deal.
talking about. But
Yep.
big threat, and big optics to them. So I ended up being like a liaison between the Iraqi FBI and the American FBI, and I'd say, hey, they want to do this. And the American FBI would be like, okay, this is X, Y, and Z, how you would make that happen. Then I'd go over the Iraqis and do that. It looked great on paper. And the concept was great. But man, where the rubber met the road, it just was, it was a lot of moving parts, a lot of roadblocks and bureaucracy, a lot of cultural clashes and differences, where it's like I'm there supposed to be advising, how to be setting up targeting packages for personnel, so that they can successfully apprehend criminals on a national level. And instead, I'm getting asked to go down to the basement to ask them to turn the power generator back on because the engineers won't listen to the Iraqis, but they'll listen to me because I'm American. I was like, that's the direct opposite of transition. That means I'm, your
Yeah,
babysitter.
I'm
I'm
still
going around,
doing it.
I'm just going downstairs and, hey, turn the lights back on for these guys because, they need the computers running. Like, no, that's your job. You're the Iraqis. This is your government. This is your agency. You guys do it, And so there was like cultural clashes there. Um, I had a great who I was like assigned to mentor, which I thought this was hysterical. Again, where concept meets reality. Um, Here I am, a 2.5 year tank officer with 3 months of military intelligence training. Didn't even graduate the course. I mean, they graduated me,
You're
but they
right.
graduated me early, so I didn't even get to complete the whole course. Um, and I was assigned to mentor a Iraqi lieutenant colonel who was like an Iraqi James Bond. He'd been like running, sources and he's a career intelligence officer. He was an intelligence officer back in Saddam's army and everything else. Like
Wow.
this guy's got like 30 years intelligence experience, and here I am, a 25-year-old captain telling him, "Hey, this is how it's supposed to go." But he and I we recognized it for what it was, so we each, played the part, I guess you would say. He's like, "Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good idea, Captain. We should do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." And we both like roll our eyes, and he was a good egg, but he kind of got it too. He's like, "All right, you go over there and file your reports. I'll go over here and talk to my guys." And we're like, "Okay, cool." We would collaborate on some stuff that we could work on. Um, like I got they did some sort of operation where they nabbed somebody, but I got recognition from like the official multinational force Iraq cadre that was in the green zone in the US embassy. I got them to recognize that specific unit for that initiative, which bumped them up in a certain way in terms of their legitimacy and whatnot, and that helped them to reign even more control over themselves. So like little things like that we would work on, but overall, that was a rough deployment, man.
So let's
It did. I would say just on to I kind of went off on a tangent as I said I would, but to answer your question more pointedly, I will say that second deployment, a lot of the personalities that I worked with, both on the Iraqi side and the American side, whether civilian, officer, whatever, support personnel, a lot of those personalities from that particular year made an indelible mark on me for good or for bad, which any writer worth their salt will tell you, if you cross us in any certain way, you may or may not end up in a story someday. So I'll just leave that there, in terms of how that goes. Yeah.
so let's go into your new book, The Infiltrator, and
Hmm.
um, this time around, it looks like Derek Harrington's kind of spoiler free, given a new mission, and of course the title's The Infiltrator. So I think you can kind of add things up there. But how did you approach this one, um, as far as going into what he's doing next without it kind of being a repetition of the same stuff and an evolution of the character?
Yeah, and that was the major like challenge that I had going into the second one was okay, the first book he's in this, camp that he suspects is a domestic terrorist cell, and now in the second book, I was like, well, I can't just have him going into camp after camp after camp. Like that's just going to be repetitious, and nobody's going to want to do that. So I need to stay with that storyline, but I need to flip it in such a way that it's not just repeating one success after another, and here we go. And kind of the opening chapters alludes to the fact that, like, yeah, no, over the past year, the FBI has been kicking ass, taking names, at one camp after another, but we just gloss over that to get to the actual plot of the Infiltrator and what's going to happen with that particular mission that will flip the storyline in such a way that people won't be bored to death of it or say this is just repetitious. At the same time, I knew that I wanted to go not global but like national with the plot. The original is very, very centered on essentially just upstate New York.
Right.
There's a little bit that happens on Long Island, a little bit that takes place in New York City, but those are more just like plot drivers. The actual story happens almost exclusively in upstate New
Yeah,
York,
it
right?
does.
And my idea here was like, if I'm going to give this legs, is we need to expand this out. So in the Infiltrator, you start seeing the plot cover up and down the East Coast and start working its way out west into the Midwest and whatnot. And there's different advantages and disadvantages that come with that. New terrain that he has to work through, new logistical challenges that the overall mission has to work through, both on the antagonist and protagonist side, right? Because like, oh, okay, the FBI has to fly him out to this destination. Like, okay, well, that's an 8 hour plane ride or 4 hour helicopter ride if I do it from this spot instead, those kinds of things. But then on the flip side, for the antagonist group, it's like, okay, where are they getting their weapons from? Like, all their camps are getting shut down. So where are their weapons coming from? Where are they
Mm.
getting personnel from? And that really allowed me to start pulling in different personalities, different regions, lets me lay a little groundwork for the same thing into number 3, where I can like just keep chaining events together and chaining regions. So that is, I think, the biggest difference in what happens there and how it really expands upon everything. And then, of course, there's the close to home aspect of the story too, where you saw the beginnings of that in the Infiltrator with all the things that he's dealing with, more so in the first third of the book, where he's just showing all the reasons why he has to take this job in that camp. But those things didn't just like magically go away at the end of the first book.
Right.
They're all still very present in the second. So seeing how those develop, seeing how they develop in relation to the situation Derek finds himself in number 2, and then again, like bringing it out of the wilderness and making it hit a little closer to home, uh, so that you're starting to see what takes, is much more prevalent in number 3. But what you're starting to see is the series not necessarily have to exist out in the woods somewhere. Like, oh, okay, we had an action sequence that took place over here on a city street. Like, okay, this isn't going to be a whole series of just Derek walking around in the woods. So I'm laying a lot of that groundwork and a lot of that possibility in the second one, which is a departure and I think a distinction from the first one.
So, what kind of research did you do for this one? Because on the front cover, and those who haven't seen it, on the front cover, it is a sniper ghillie suit. That alludes to probably some shooting action going on, some marksmanship. What kind of research did you do for this one?
Um, so I did, like I said, a lot of the research was on the original story arc. I had like this dual storyline going on. So a lot of the research was on that Air Force type storyline. But the other stuff that remained, a lot of it was like piecemeal as it came up as I needed it through the story. Like there wasn't a major, like I'm working on a project right now where the last 2 days I've spent doing like straight research, hours reading into like metallurgy, things that I don't know. Everything in the Infiltrator had more of I'd write just in the guise of the story, but then I would get up to a point and be like, okay, this needs a little more authentic detail here. So I would break and I would research it. But I never go crazy in depth with some of that detail. I don't. I know a lot of readers enjoy that, and my mind goes to Jack Carr right away. I enjoy it. I enjoy reading it too. I just don't necessarily enjoy writing it. I'd rather leave it a little more, not vague, but just a little more open.
Mhm.
Where, like, in Jack's books, he's giving you like the grains of the ammunition that's being used, and it's highly, highly detailed, highly specific, and that's fantastic. But like, I don't have that operational knowledge. I wasn't a Navy SEAL, and stuff that he can rattle off and put into his manuscripts and books is probably second nature to him. Me, that would take like 7 hours to research, and I would probably get it wrong anyway. So like, I would rather like base my sniper research on like, okay, in 2020, let's see, the book takes place in 2019, right? In 2019, what was the United States Army's primary sniper rifle platform? Their base level platform, right? And if I have that detail, I'm good there.
Mhm.
Like, what's the basics of ballistics in terms of bullet drop and windage and calculation. Like, I don't need to go through the whole procedure per se, but I need to have enough in there where military thriller fans can be like, yeah, that's cool. Like,
Yeah. Nobody calls BS
let's
on you.
be yeah, well, nobody calls BS, number one, but number two, like, we like to be gearheads. We
Mhm.
like, our backpacks and our rifles and what kind of ammunition we're using and everything like that. So I like to more sprinkle that in, to make it relevant and make it authentic. But I don't like to go into like what I would call the Clancy depth, where I'm
You're teaching.
outlining, yeah, just 400 pages spent talking about the inner workings of a nuclear submarine. It's like, that's great, but when is something going to blow up?
Yeah.
Come on, let's get to it finally. And that was the thing I loved and hated about Clancy. It's like, all this technical data is, I mean,
It's
it's
impressive.
amazing,
Yeah.
impressive, but man, I'm bored to tears. But once that action hit from all that setup,
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit,
Yeah.
this is phenomenal. And that's what kept me coming back for more. That's why, shout out to Jack Stewart, by the way, because his Unknown Rider is, I called it like Clancy-esque, because he has all of that like techno thriller
Mhm.
aspect, but he trimmed the fat, man. It
Yeah, he
was
did.
just like,
Yeah, he
hey,
did.
I'm going to take you inside the cockpit of an F-35, but I'm not going to browbeat you over the head with its operating systems
Yeah.
and go into pages and pages and chapters of electronic countermeasures. He kept it lean and good, and
He
that's
did.
what I think is the natural kind of like evolution of that type,
Well,
of techno thriller.
I think that's how books have to be nowadays.
Sorry, my phone alarm went off. I forgot that I had that on there. Yeah, 100%, because the reader, today day, we just have shorter attention
Oh
spans.
yeah.
We just anytime somebody says, I mean, you and I, we're a little over we're on the sunset side of things, right?
Yeah.
Like, you and I can probably remember VHS tapes
Mhm.
and having a movie that was two tapes, right?
Oh yeah.
Because it was
So long.
a 3.5 hour four movie. And you would take it out, like Titanic was originally a two taper. And I think Braveheart was a two taper.
Yep.
And even older movies, like, back in the 50s and 60s, a 3-4 hour movie was the norm,
Mhm.
because you would have the intermission.
Yeah.
You would have Lawrence of Arabia or Spartacus, and they'd have like 15 minutes of orchestra, and then you'd watch the first 2 hours. Then there'd be an intermission. You'd come back for the last hour and a half. People can't do that now.
Oh
Like,
no.
they
Could you
can't. No,
imagine?
this. No, there's
Oh,
no idea, no way that people. So the same thing has to be for your books too. Like if you're gonna write an 800-page book, you better one either have the following that people are going to read it no matter what, which let's be honest, not a lot of us have just yet.
yeah,
You're talking those name brands that we can rattle off the top of our head, or it better be engaging for 800 pages,
yeah. It can't
to
feel like
keep
it.
people. Yeah, it
It
can't
can't feel
feel
like
like it.
800 pages. It
Exactly.
has to feel like 350. It has to, because it's
Right,
just people
right.
just won't.
Especially in this genre,
Hmm.
especially where it's like, well, you're not doing world building. You're not doing science fiction atmosphere where things need to be explained. Like we know how the earth works, we know how gravity works, we
Yeah,
we we know what kind of ammunition goes in a M4 rifle. You don't have to make that shit up,
yeah,
so it better be lean, because if you're sitting there like, okay, so this is the gas operated insides of, and the chamber pulls, or the bolt flies back and the firing pin comes through. Nobody cares. Everybody knows that already.
yeah.
So
And the people who
like, why,
don't
why are
know
you going to
it,
explain it?
they're not that worried
Yeah,
about it because
exactly.
they're
They don't
reading to
need
be
the inner
entertained.
workings.
Yeah,
Right. They don't need the inner workings. They don't need the field manual. They just want to know, did the boomstick go boom and who got hit on the other side of it, And
yeah.
if you give them that, then you're better off, in my opinion.
So let's before I let you go, let's do kind of a spoiler-free what to expect from the Infiltrator and your 2024.
Spoiler free Infiltrator. So, um, I think the biggest thing that I can sell readers on this time around is it is, let's say that if the instructor was lighting the fuse, the infiltrator is the powder keg going off,
Mm,
right? Like there was a lot of character development and setup and kind of laying the groundwork for the storyline that was going to arc over these 3-4 books of this particular storyline. um, that happened in number one. And not to say that it's not without its character development and all those other elements in number two, but there's, I think, a lot more action. This is a much more of an adrenaline rush in the Infiltrator than in um, the instructor. You have, if the instructor is like Greco-Roman wrestling, then the Infiltrator is like an MMA fight. It's like that kind of thing. Is like, okay, they're both struggles, they're both athletic, they're both action packed, but like one is more of a push pull, and the other one is just blinding fury, kind of
yeah.
elbows and punches and knuckles and stuff. So that's the thing that really got me psyched up about the Infiltrator. Is the action sequences that were put in there, just kind of the pacing of how once it takes off, there's a little bit of setup, but once it takes off, it doesn't really relent until the end. And then, uh, like the instructor, just it kind of leaves you off wanting more. So, hopefully we'll get there with number three.
So what else do you have in store as far as projects goes? You working on book three? You working on spin-offs? What else is going on?
Yeah, so I've got too much going on. I so I'm like, remember that Disney movie? I'm gonna probably, this is probably a bad analogy, but because I had kids, remember that Disney movie Up, and it had the dog with the collar that could speak,
Hmm.
and he would like start speaking, and then he would see a squirrel, and he'd be like, hey, "Hi, I just met you," and squirrel, like that's me with my writing. I when I get the new squirrel, or the flash of inspiration, as it were, I will jump to that and work on it, but number three is in the works. Still have faith in that one and want to see that series through. In the interim, I'm also working on three other projects, which are still action oriented, still in the thriller space, but slightly different than what you might come to expect from um, having read my first two books. Like, oh, okay, I didn't know that Tim's next book was going to be a dystopian,
Yeah.
world kind of guns blazing type thing. But I've got, two of those irons in the fire. And I've also got it's kind of framed as a young adult book, but it may end up being an adult anyway. By the time I'm done with it, I have a hard time keeping things not at the adult level.
Tone it down.
Yeah, it's like geez. So those are in the works in terms of working on those projects, and then it's just the grind to April of doing the publicity for the release of this one, and then we'll hopefully here sometime soon be able to announce the next project coming up. So
Nice. So before I let you go, tell everybody where they can go find more about you, stay caught up with all the news and all that.
yeah, so you can always go to my website. It's trhendricksauthor.com. We're going through a bit of a revitalization on that now as we adapt it from the original over to the sequel. On X, I'm still calling it Twitter, but on
Yeah.
X, Twitter, it's TR_Hendricks, because my Twitter handle existed well before I became an author. So I didn't I didn't really have a way to maneuver that one. But then my other channels are all Read TR Hendricks, READ TR Hendricks, and that's on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. I'm more prevalent on Instagram than anything else. I just find it more engaging with getting to work with both the captions and the stories and the pictures. It's
Yeah.
like I have a bunch of different mediums that I can really leverage. But sometimes if I have to do exclusive videos, I'll jump over to TikTok. Those are usually really stupid. Just warning you now, they're really, really stupid, but we have fun, whatever.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on and doing this. I can't wait for the Infiltrator to come out this April, and of course, stay in touch. And I'll see you. You're gonna go to BoucherCon this year?
Yes, I need to get on that. I've never been to Boucher before, and I've never been to Nashville before.
Mm,
So, and they're both on my bucket list. So I'm like, what better way to knock this out than to head on down there? And plus, I know like my buddy Josh Hood is I think local, nearby
yeah, a bunch of
somewhere
people
down there
are.
in the Tennessee, and Mark Rainey is down in like the Tennessee, Kentucky kind of area. So as always, there's going to be some names there, and it's a good hangout, good time. And I just want to see what Boucher is. I'm always at Thriller Fest because it's kind of like hard for me not to go when it's
Right.
just 20 minutes down the road from me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I should be there. But yeah, Nashville, I gotta book some tickets pretty soon here.
Yeah. Cool. Well, then I'll hopefully see you there. And again, I hope the Infiltrator is everything you want it to be, and I can't wait for it to land in a mailbox.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for having me on again. I really appreciate it. And this is always a great time talking to you.